You are standing in a room that should smell of power, of incense and rosewater, of the divine authority that drips from the throne behind her. But it doesn't. The air is thick. Still. Heavy like wool soaked in sweat. Something sour clings to the back of your throat. Something ancient. You blink through the dim light, your eyes adjusting to the haze of candle smoke and perfumed mist that dances through the court like a disguise. Then she enters. Not with a shout, not with the thunder of drums, but with silence sharp enough to slice bone. Her footsteps do not echo, they are swallowed by the walls, as though the stones themselves have learned to hold their breath in her presence. She moves like a phantom in gold, her skirts brushing the floor like whispers from a grave. You lower your eyes because you must. Not out of fear. Not entirely. But because looking at her too long feels like trespassing on something sacred. And yet. Sacred things are supposed to be clean. She lifts a gloved hand. White leather, damp around the edges, stained faintly brown where fingers have sweated through the seams. The scent reaches you before she does. It rides the air like smoke, like decay in a garden. Not death. Not quite. But the kind of rot that hides beneath roses. The kind that grows when no one is looking. Her face is powdered smooth, ghostly white, so flawless it no longer looks human. Beneath the surface, something is cracking. Tiny fissures in the lead-based mask she wears like armor. Her skin does not breathe. It cannot. And neither can you. You force yourself not to recoil. This is Elizabeth. The Virgin Queen. Glorious. Exalted. Eternal. But you smell her. Beneath the damask and diamonds, beneath the pearl-inlaid bodice and the thousand-thread count lace, there is sweat. Old sweat. Days old. Weeks. Layered over with rose oil and civet, with powders made from crushed bone and ash. You are inhaling centuries. You are inhaling her. She does not bathe. Not because she cannot. But because she will not. Water is feared, mistrusted, forbidden. Cleanliness is dangerous. A threat. A weakness. She is too wise to be clean. Too sovereign to be soft. The court smiles. Bows. Nods. No one says a word. No one speaks of the damp patches beneath her arms, the linen chemises worn until they yellow and stiffen, the wigs that swarm with lice and are dusted with flour to mask the movement. No one speaks of the toothaches, the blackened breath, the ragged gums hiding behind a forced smile that has ruled empires. You are not supposed to know. History will show you paintings, divine portraits of a woman untouched by time. Immaculate. Immortal. History lies. Because behind the myth is a body. A body sealed in cloth and ceremony. A body at war with itself. A body decaying one ritual at a time. And that is what you are smelling. The truth. You can taste it now, can't you? On the back of your tongue. The mix of power and filth. Roses and iron. Majesty and mildew. It's in the air, yes, but it's also in the silence. In the way no one dares breathe too deep. In the way the throne itself seems to recoil from the woman seated on it. There is no breeze in the room. Nothing moves. Not even time. This is what rule smells like. This is what fear smells like. And no textbook ever warned you. Because they scrubbed her clean. They edited her into legend. They powdered the page like she powdered her face, until all that was left was fiction. But she was real. And she stank. What you are about to hear is not the version taught in schools. It is not the woman embroidered into national pride. It is the body beneath the gown. The skin beneath the paint. The rot beneath the crown. This is not just about hygiene. It is about illusion. It is about the lengths a monarch will go to preserve a lie so beautiful the truth can never crawl out from under it. We are peeling back the velvet now. You may want to hold your breath. Because we are going deeper than any history book ever dared. And the air only gets darker from here. You must understand one thing. In Elizabethan England, filth was not failure. It was survival. To be clean in the 16th century was to invite death into your skin. Water, they believed, opened the body like a door, and through that door came illness. Cold. Plague. The devil's breath. A wet body was a vulnerable one. A soft one. A doomed one. The myth of cleanliness, what you think of as purity, meant something else entirely back then. It meant danger. And for a woman whose life depended on control, vulnerability was never an option. This wasn't madness. Not then. It was medicine. Or what passed for it. Doctors, still clinging to Galenic theory, preached that the body was a balance of humors, blood, phlegm, black bile, and yellow bile. Disrupt one, and the body crumbled. Water, they said, disrupted them all. It opened the pores and let the miasma in, the invisible rot in the air, carrying plague and death and God's punishment. The stench of the poor was not just unpleasant, it was contagious. Bad smells weren't just unseemly. They were fatal. They carried spirits. They carried sin. And so the people of the Elizabethan world didn't fear filth. They feared its opposite. You weren't protected by soap. You were protected by stink. The stronger your perfume, the thicker your layer of dust and cloth, the safer you were from what lurked outside the body. They didn't cleanse to survive, they covered. They masked. They sealed themselves in. And no one masked better than the Queen. She was not merely obeying fashion. She was obeying doctrine. To bathe was to gamble with fate. Her chambers were filled not with steam and water, but with vinegar-soaked cloths, dried herbs pinned to windows, and pomanders swung around her like censers in a cathedral of rot. Orange peels and cloves stuffed in pockets. Dried lavender crushed underfoot. Not for pleasure. For protection. Because the plague was always near. In London, it pulsed through the alleys like a rumor. It silenced households in a single night. Corpses dumped in pits. Bells tolling for hours. Elizabeth had seen it, heard it. As a child, she'd been moved from palace to palace, always one step ahead of death. And so, she learned early, keep your doors shut, your windows locked, and your skin dry. What she feared most wasn't madness or war, it was disease. It was the sudden betrayal of her own body. So she didn't wash. Instead, she powdered. Instead, she sealed. Instead, she wrapped herself in fabric and formula, in superstition disguised as custom, until her body no longer belonged to her. It belonged to the image. To the state. To a crown that demanded immortality, even as it decayed beneath its own weight. She wasn't alone. The nobility believed in sweating out illness rather than washing it away. Steam baths were suspect. Bathhouses were dens of sin and infection. Instead of rinsing, they changed their linen underclothes, thin, pale sheets meant to absorb the filth and draw it out from the skin like poison from a wound. The linen was the soap. The odor masked with herbs. And even the act of changing it was seen as sacred. Doctors advised against frequent bathing. The Queen's own physicians warned her not to disturb the skin's protective layer. Water, they said, was for the poor. For the dead. Not for a monarch chosen by God. So she obeyed. Every day, Elizabeth followed a strict regimen that would appall the modern eye, but was considered impeccable then. Her face, caked in white lead and vinegar, was wiped gently with cloths dipped in rosewater. Her teeth, already rotting from sugar and neglect, were brushed not with bristles but with rags soaked in wine and honey. Her hair, rarely seen, was hidden beneath wigs powdered with flour, pinned tight and unwashed for weeks at a time. Her gowns were never cleaned, only sprayed with perfume and aired out. What could not be scrubbed was covered. And always, the silence. No one dared suggest another way. Not the maids who wiped her back with spiced cloths. Not the advisors who stood close enough to feel the heat of her body beneath those suffocating gowns. Not the ambassadors who knelt, pretending not to flinch when the air shifted around her. To speak of it was to threaten the illusion. Because to challenge her cleanliness was to challenge her divinity. Her control. Her right to rule. It was to question whether she was woman or myth. And myths must never sweat. But now you know. Now, you are breathing the air they dared not describe. Now, you see how fear shaped her, how fear became ritual, and ritual became identity. Hygiene was not just a habit. It was a performance. And no one performed like Elizabeth. She was a queen born in blood, raised in whispers, and built for survival. Even if it meant never feeling clean again. And if you're still here, still watching, still holding your breath through centuries of powder and perfume, then you understand something most never will. You're not just witnessing history. You're smelling it. You're inhaling what the books left out. So if you're one of the few who made it this far, and still haven't subscribed to Tale of History, ask yourself why. If the Queen of England could build an empire without soap, surely you can lift a finger. And if you won't, we dare you. Step into the comments. Tell the world what's stopping you. We're just getting started. Habit 10, she feared water like a curse. You stand at the threshold of her private chambers. The court is gone now, its pageantry, its painted faces, its masks of etiquette left outside the velvet-lined doors. Here, there are no trumpets. No courtiers bowing. Just the quiet creak of floorboards as you enter the domain no outsider was meant to know. The air is even heavier here. Stiller. As if the room itself is holding its breath. You look around, expecting to see the luxury of the crown, marble tubs, silver basins, piles of fine linen. But there is no bath. No running water. No soap-slicked tiles. Only cloth, layer upon layer of linen, folded and stacked with military precision. Jars of rose oil. Bundles of herbs hung from wooden pegs like wards against something ancient and unseen. This is not a place of washing. It is a place of avoidance. Because she didn't bathe. Not once a day. Not once a week. Once a month, if that. To immerse oneself in water was to risk illness, madness, even death. Her physicians warned her. Bathing could open the pores too wide, weakening the body's defenses. Evil entered through the skin, they said, riding in on steam and droplets. The very act of washing could kill you. And Elizabeth listened. She wasn't foolish. She was terrified. Not of dirt, but of exposure. And so she adapted. Each morning, a cloth damp with scented water was pressed gently to her skin. Not to cleanse it, but to suit the illusion of ritual. She dabbed, not scrubbed. She blotted, not rinsed. A basin was placed at her feet, shallow and symbolic, into which she would lower her hands, never her full body. Her ladies-in-waiting would then dry her, carefully, as if touching a relic. This was her cleansing. This was her armor. She believed, as many did, that regular bathing made one fragile. That cleanliness was not next to godliness, but a flirtation with disaster. That a body kept dry and sealed was a body kept whole. There are records, fragmented, whispered, of times when she bathed more frequently during illness. But even then, it was an act performed with fear. A risk calculated with dread. Always supervised. Always partial. Always shadowed by the possibility that water might invite decay instead of prevent it. And when she did bathe, it was not in the marble luxury you might imagine. The royal tubs were wooden. Shallow. Lined with linen to absorb the filth, not wash it away. The water, heated and perfumed, was used sparingly. There was no running stream, no cascade. Only stillness. Only enough to pretend. She didn't sweat like others did, they said. She didn't need to wash because she was different, a queen touched by divine right, preserved by grace, not water. That's what the court whispered. That's what they chose to believe. But the truth lingers in the linens she left behind, yellowed and stiff, clinging to the faint, stubborn scent of skin never scrubbed. You step further into the chamber and see the pitcher by her bedside. Porcelain. Empty. Beside it, a cloth still damp. It's been used. Folded again to hide the stain. Her scent is on it still, faint but distinct. The musk of skin wrapped too long in its own silence. You touch nothing. You breathe shallowly. Because this is more than a room. This is a belief system. A fortress built on fear, ritual, and the myth of cleanliness as danger. And behind it stood the most powerful woman in the Western world. All her enemies feared her sword. But what she feared, what ruled her more than any advisor, general, or suitor, was the bath. You may find that absurd. But the past is not here to flatter your modern sensibilities. It is here to remind you that power does not always look like steel and flame. Sometimes, it looks like a queen standing naked in a room and deciding not to cleanse herself. Because to do so would be to let death in through the skin. And if you've stayed this long, if your fingers have not yet clicked that red button to subscribe to Tale of History, what are you waiting for? She ruled the known world with an unwashed hand. You can surely press one clean fingertip in honor of that power. And if not, tell us why in the comments. Say it out loud. Let the court hear your hesitation. Because we're just getting started. And her most disgusting habit has yet to be unwrapped. Habit 9, makeup so deadly, it melted her face. You see her face before you, long before you hear her voice. Pale. Immobile. Dazzling in its artificial perfection. It doesn't move when she smiles. It doesn't crease when she speaks. It sits, frozen, as though it were painted onto a mask and not grown from living flesh. But it wasn't always that way. Years ago, when she was still young, still unbroken by duty. Her face bore the softness of untouched skin. Before the weight of crowns. Before the betrayal of time. Before smallpox came and carved its warning into her reflection. The scars were not large. Not at first. Just faint pits across the cheeks. A tiny disfigurement. A mortal wound to an immortal myth. She stared at them in the mirror, perhaps in silence. Perhaps with fury. But one thing is certain, she would not allow them to be seen. So she reached for the remedy that all noble women knew. Venetian ceruse. A thick white paste. Made from vinegar and white lead. Smooth as cream. Poison disguised as purity. You lift the jar in your hand and watch the substance glisten like fresh snow. You think of beauty. Of elegance. Of power. But this is no mere cosmetic. This is chemical warfare waged against her own skin. Every morning, it was applied by hand or by brush, layer upon layer. Across her forehead. Down her cheeks. Over the very pores meant to breathe. It did not enhance her beauty. It erased her humanity. It burned. It stung. It corroded. And still, she wore it. Because the whiteness meant more than vanity. It meant distance. Superiority. Divinity. In a world where tan skin meant labor, whiteness was a declaration: I do not toil. I do not sweat. I am above. But the lead did not stay on the surface. It seeped in. It crawled beneath the skin. Slowly. Invisibly. It poisoned her blood. Inflamed her eyes. Made her hair fall out. It thickened her tongue. Sharpened her temper. It hollowed her bones until her spine ached beneath the weight of her gowns. And worst of all, it began to eat her face. Not in theory. Not in metaphor. In flesh. Tiny ulcers opened along her chin. Red sores bloomed beneath her lower lip. Her skin began to flake, to bleed, to sag. And still, she added more. Because the damage had to be concealed. And the only thing that could cover the wounds, was the very thing that caused them. So the layers thickened. The mask hardened. The woman disappeared. And when the courtiers bowed, they didn't see her face. They saw a death mask, worn long before the grave. The physicians knew. Quietly. Fearfully. But they would not say the word poison. They treated the symptoms. Offered rosewater compresses. Advised lighter applications. But they could not command her to stop. Because this was not vanity. This was strategy. Elizabeth ruled not with armies, but with illusion. Her appearance was her power. Her stillness, her serenity, her divine paleness. These were weapons. And once the lead began its work, she had no way back. The mask had to remain. Even if it was eating her alive. And so, behind closed doors, her maids scraped flakes of dead skin from her collarbones. They dabbed salves on raw patches. They lifted her wigs to reveal bald spots, damp with pus. They whispered to one another in terror and silence, watching as their queen dissolved, day by day, beneath a poison she could never abandon. Imagine that. Imagine waking each morning to a mirror that shows you less and less of who you were. Imagine applying, with steady hands, the very paste that stole your face. And doing it with pride. Because anything less would be weakness. Now look again at her portraits. At the face you were taught to revere. The flawless oval, the pale glow, the painted calm. That is not beauty. That is suffering fossilized. A lie told with such perfection that even death could not erase it. And still, she endured. Because a queen who bled was still a queen. But a queen who aged. A queen who blemished. That was a woman. And women were disposable. So she burned. And she smiled. And the world bowed lower each year, even as her skin fell away beneath their gaze. If you're still watching, if her pain has made you silent, if her silence has made you think, then you already know why we tell stories like this. Because Tale of History is not here to flatter the past. We are here to uncover it. In all its elegance. In all its ugliness. And if you have not subscribed yet, what's stopping you? She sacrificed her skin for power. You can sacrifice one click for truth. And if not, say so in the comments. But remember this, the queen may be dust now, but her mask still lingers. And it's heavier than you think. Habit 8, she slept in a nest of filth at the end of each day, when the court had fallen silent and the echoes of flattery faded into stone, she returned here. To her chambers. To her sanctuary. To her prison. You imagine royalty and you imagine silk sheets. Gold-embroidered pillows. Featherbeds fluffed daily by silent, reverent hands. You imagine a space so pristine, so sacred, that even dust would hesitate to settle. But reality is heavier than dreams. And it smells different. Step closer. The bed is grand, yes, massive, elevated, framed in thick, carved oak. The canopy is rich with velvet drapes, dyed deep crimson, embroidered with the Tudor rose. But look closer. Not at the ornamentation, but at the layers beneath it. The mattress is stuffed not with down, but with straw and horsehair, long since matted and compacted by years of restless turns. The linen sheets are yellowed at the corners, stiff where moisture once settled and dried. The smell is faint, but present. A musky sourness, sweetened only by the dried lavender tucked into its folds. It's not rot. Not decay. But the accumulation of a body left too long in the same place. She did not sleep here once. She slept here every night for decades. Her body shaped the bed the way a river carves its path through rock. She sweated here, trembled through fevers here, bled here. And almost none of it was washed away. Because washing was not routine. Not then. It was rare. Feared. Considered unnecessary, even dangerous. And so the bed became something more than furniture. It became a vessel. A living archive of her body. Every night spent in that bed added another layer, of scent, of hair, of skin, of history. And it was never truly cleaned. There was no soap, no scalding water. No sanitizing. No sterilizing. Cleaning meant airing the sheets in sunlight, beating them with sticks, or laying sachets of herbs between the folds to mask what couldn't be removed. The lavender was crushed and rubbed into the cloth. The rosemary hung above her headboard. The cloves and cinnamon sewed into tiny pouches, slipped between the mattress seams. But all that did was hide. Never purge. Her undergarments, too, linen shifts worn under gowns, day after day, absorbing sweat and oil and blood, were changed sparingly. Not daily. Sometimes not even weekly. And even when they were not boiled or scoured, but rinsed and hung to dry. Soap was a luxury. Cleanliness, a myth. Stains were not shameful. They were expected. Ignored. And beneath her, under the mattress and wood slats, lice lived undisturbed. Not crawling across the surface, no. They stayed deep, warm, hidden, fed not by filth, but by flesh. They were common. Expected. A nuisance, not a crisis. Elizabeth herself would have suffered their bites. Scratched her ankles at night. Ordered her maids to powder her mattress with sulfur or wormwood to keep the crawling at bay. But they always came back. The bed, like the crown, carried its own burdens. And she bore them silently. There were no maids stripping her bed with haste and haste again. No sterile linen rotated each sunrise. It was too time-consuming, too wasteful. There were more important things to tend to, state papers, foreign threats, ceremonial gowns, appearances to maintain. Comfort came last. Cleanliness wasn't a virtue. It was an indulgence. So each night, she returned. She stepped behind the curtains. She lay in the cradle of her own history. And the sheets remembered her. She didn't bathe. She didn't cleanse. But she slept. In the same air. On the same cloth. For years. The grandeur masked the grime. The lace hid the lice. The titles silenced the truth. Now step back. Look again at that bed. At the layers no one dared peel away. This was not filth by accident. It was filth by ritual. By fear. By faith in a system that told her the world outside the body was more dangerous than what festered inside it. Imagine that. Imagine lying in that bed for decades. Now imagine scrolling past this channel after learning that. You're too smart to ignore what history smells like. Subscribe to Tale of History. And if you won't, go ahead, tell us why in the comments. We'll wait. Because the bed may have stopped breathing centuries ago. But its secrets still sweat through the sheets. Habit 7, her teeth were black, and that was fashion you're summoned again to court. The queen is seated upon her throne, radiant in her embroidered gown, her face powdered to an eerie perfection, her hair concealed beneath a golden wig thick with pins and scent. But today, her smile is different. It is tight. Controlled. Almost hidden. She does not laugh easily anymore. Not the way she once did. And when she does smile, when she must, for diplomacy or decorum, it comes slow and small, a slit between pressed lips. And behind that narrow crack, you glimpse them. Just for a moment. Her teeth. Not white. Not yellow. But black. Not by choice. Not at first. But because her greatest pleasure had turned against her. She loved sweets. Imported sugar from the New World. Turkish delight soaked in rosewater. Candied violets and quinces, dried plums dipped in honey, and marzipan molded into shapes of swans and castles. She indulged not with gluttony, but with the hunger of a woman who had been denied other pleasures, marriage, motherhood, tenderness. This was joy. This was decadence. This was control. But there was no dentistry then. No brushes. No floss. No antiseptic. There were only rags soaked in wine. Twigs chewed into fibrous bristles. Powders made from crushed shells and chalk. And prayers that the rot would pass you over. It didn't pass her. One by one, her teeth began to die. They blackened at the gums. Hollowed from within. The pain crept into her jaw, up into her ear, down into her throat. She drank hot wine to dull it. She clutched cloves between her teeth for hours. She pressed linen soaked in vinegar against the swelling. And when none of it worked, when the pain screamed through her face like a fire, she allowed the surgeons to come. Not doctors. Not healers. Barbers. Their tools were brutal. Iron hooks. Bone levers. Pliers. No anesthesia. No warning. No mercy. The queen, ruler of empires, sat trembling as a man with stained hands and a blood-soaked apron reached into her mouth and tore a tooth from her skull. She reportedly screamed. She reportedly fainted. And the court said nothing. Because her agony was sacred. It was proof that she was still human beneath the paint. But no one dared say it. No one dared speak of the smell of infection, or the soft swell at the side of her face where an abscess pulsed with each heartbeat. No one mentioned the blood-stained linens burned in secret after her extractions. Instead, they imitated her. Blackened teeth became not a flaw, but a fashion. To be rotted was to be rich. To be pained was to be powerful. So the court ladies began to paint their teeth with soot. With ink. With ground coal. They darkened their smiles to match hers. Not because they suffered, but because they needed to be seen suffering like her. To appear too healthy was to appear too distant. Too low. Too poor. She had turned a deformity into a crown. And in doing so, she created a court of shadows, smiling mouths filled with ink and silence. Teeth no longer meant vitality. They meant proximity to the queen. But her suffering continued. She lost more teeth. Eventually, it said, she could not chew meat. Her meals were softened. Soups. Mashed fruits. Eggs. Broths. Her jaw ached when she spoke for too long. And her smile, retreated. She mastered the art of the closed-mouth smirk. She whispered through clenched teeth. She showed only what she had to. Because the rest was gone. Her face had become a battlefield. Her breath, a warning. Her mouth, a wound too sacred to name. And still, she ruled. Still, she sat upon the throne, her broken smile hidden behind centuries of protocol and powder. You wonder if she wept in private. If, in the cold hours of the night, as she lay beneath her lavender-soaked sheets, she reached into her own mouth and felt the void where pieces of her once were. And then, you wonder, why we were never taught this. Why no portrait shows her teeth. Why no textbook speaks of the rot behind the crown. Why history refuses to open its mouth and reveal what lingers behind the breath of power. But we will. Because tale of history is not here to preserve the lie. We are here to exhume it. If you're still watching, still breathing in this truth, then you know what must come next. Subscribe. Before this part of history is buried again. And if you won't, don't just walk away. Tell us in the comments. Speak it plainly. We'll be here, with open mouths and sharpened truths, ready to bite back. Habit 6, a crown infested with lice. You remember the portraits. The impossible hair, coiled, stacked, curled, and pinned with pearls. A golden halo of craftsmanship, rising above her like a second crown. It looked divine. Untouchable. Almost celestial. But you were never meant to ask what was beneath it. She wore wigs not for fashion, but for necessity. Elizabeth shaved her head, partly for the ideal shape beneath her ornate hairpieces, but mostly to escape the living things that bred in her scalp. Lice. Tiny, ravenous things, hungry for blood and warmth, burrowing behind ears and crawling along the base of the neck. No one in the 16th century escaped them. Not the peasants with straw-filled caps. Not the nobles with silk bonnets. Not even the Virgin Queen herself. Her wigs, magnificent, towering, and ceremonial, were made from real hair. Often from other women. Sometimes from corpses. Hair stitched onto netting. Sewn into shapes. Hardened with wax. Then powdered. Scented. Decorated. But never cleaned. There was no way to wash them. No method to sanitize. Water would destroy the structure. Soap would ruin the powder. So they were dusted with flour, sprayed with lavender, and worn again. And again. And again. And so, they swarmed. Fleas. Lice. Mites. Insects so small they could pass unnoticed through ceremony and spectacle, but never through suffering. Underneath, her scalp was a battlefield. She scratched until she bled. The inflammation would rise in red, weeping patches, angry sores hidden beneath the stiff netting of her wig cap. Maids would apply herbal salves. Comfrey, lavender, vinegar rinses, trying to soothe what they could not see. And then they would reapply the wig. The weight pressing against raw flesh. Trapping heat. Encouraging infection. And she bore it. Silently. Because it wasn't just about hiding baldness. It was about hiding weakness. The queen must never appear mortal. Not even to herself. The wigs became a prison. They grew larger over time. More elaborate. More surreal. A wall of false hair and pearls between her and the world. There are stories, unconfirmed, but whispered through the corridors of history, of live lice tumbling out during a court session. Of a wig so heavily powdered it collapsed under its own weight. Of the stench it gave off after hours beneath candlelight. But none of it was acknowledged. Her court mimicked her. Ladies powdered their own wigs to match. They learned to live with the itching. The crawling. The small wounds at the hairline. Some shaved their heads, as she did. Some whispered that her hair had long since stopped growing. That her scalp had been damaged beyond healing. And yet she kept wearing them. Because the alternative, showing her true head, was unthinkable. You see, a monarch's hair was more than vanity. It was symbol. To lose it was to lose femininity. To lose femininity was to invite vulnerability. And Elizabeth could afford neither. So she lived with the infestation. She crowned herself in it. She wore her agony as ritual. And when you look at those paintings again, when you see the shimmering coils and braided spirals that seem to defy gravity, remember, they were not made to beautify. They were made to bury. Beneath them lay sores. Wounds. Skin that never healed. The crown was not gold alone. It was hair. And insects. And blood. Still think royalty is glamorous? Still watching, still haven't hit subscribe? You owe it to yourself to know how history really looked and smelled. Be bold. Be honest. If not, we dare you to explain why you won't subscribe in the comments. Because the lice may be long dead. But the lie they crawled beneath? It's still very much alive. Habit 5, she used mouse fur on her eyebrows. Step closer to her now. She sits beneath the morning light as her ladies begin their sacred routine. The silence is sharp, every movement measured, every brushstroke precise, as if her skin were parchment and their hands were quills scripting scripture. You watch as her wig is set aside, revealing the pale, inflamed scalp beneath. The powder is reapplied. The mask restored. And then comes the part no one outside these walls ever saw. The mirror is tilted. She leans forward, not to admire, but to inspect. The face she's created must match the image. Every day. Without fail. But something is missing. Her eyebrows. She had them once. Soft arches, untouched by politics, by time. But they were plucked away, erased in pursuit of perfection. Fashion, they said, demanded a bare forehead. High. Untouched. The canvas of nobility. And so she obeyed. The brows came out, one by one, tugged until nothing remained but skin. White, veined, exposed. But a blank face, even one painted with lead, still required symmetry. Still required control. So she turned to a solution. Mouse fur. Tiny tufts. Cut from the bodies of vermin. Washed, sometimes. Dried, always. Then shaped. Arched. Darkened with soot. The perfect curve of command. And every morning, one of her maids would lift a tin box, open its delicate lid, and reveal what lay inside. Dozens of these tiny pelts, lined up like sleeping creatures. Some stiff. Some curling at the edges from dried sweat. All silent. All waiting. A small dab of glue was applied to her brow. The fur pressed gently into place. A queen's signature restored. You want to recoil. You want to laugh, maybe. A monarch, a goddess in the eyes of her people, crafting her image from rodents. But this was not comedy. It was compulsion. It was devotion to a myth so fragile, even the faintest hint of a human imperfection had to be filled in with fur. They were reused, of course. Washed only when necessary, if at all. They absorbed the oils from her skin. The sweat. The powder. The glue. They hardened over time. Some carried the faintest scent of musk. Others were crawling. Lice did not limit themselves to scalps. Her maids whispered of days when a patch would twitch as it was applied, when something beneath the fur would move. But no one spoke of it aloud. Because the illusion had to hold. Even if it squirmed. It was a look of power built on rodents. A face built on ritual. You stare now, and you understand, the elegance was never real. It was stitched. Painted. Composed from death and dust and decay. And yet, she ruled. With fur on her face. With glue at her brow. With every piece of herself patched and reconstructed into a symbol that no one could question, not even her. Because once you begin to replace your body with pieces of something else, you no longer own yourself. You become the myth. And the myth, once born, can never bleed. Can never age. Can never falter. Only rot. Silently. In secret. So the mouse fur remains. It is a relic now. Forgotten. Preserved in museums under glass. But once, it rested on a queen's face. It sat above eyes that had seen war, treason, coronation, and betrayal. And it never blinked. Still here. Still peeling back the velvet? Still thinking you know history? Subscribe to Tale of History. You've seen what lies beneath the crown. Don't pretend you didn't. Don't walk away pretending it wasn't there. And if you won't subscribe, don't be silent. Say it in the comments. Let the world hear you justify it. Let them watch you look away. Habit 4. She relied on perfumed gloves to mask her rot. You think of gloves as fashion. A gesture. An afterthought. Silk brushing against the skin during a curtsy, leather clenching the hilt of a sword, velvet resting daintily atop a lady's lap. In your world, gloves are ornaments. In hers, they were a mask. You see her now, sitting beneath a painted canopy, a single hand raised as she speaks. Not bare. Never bare. Always gloved. Always covered. The fabric clings tight across the fingers, almost damp, as if soaked in something more than sweat. Because it was civet. Extracted from the gland of a wild cat, musky, pungent, nearly unbearable in its raw form. But once tamed with rose oil and ambergris, it became desirable. Regal. Powerful. Her gloves were steeped in it. Saturated for hours, sometimes days, in this animal secretion turned perfume. The scent clung to them long after the gloves were dried. And when she wore them, every day, without fail, the air around her was no longer neutral. It was claimed. Commanded. But the perfume wasn't for pleasure. It was a weapon. A shield. A scented wall between her and the world, between her own stench and the noses of those who dared stand too close. Because by now, the rot was no longer hidden. Her mouth, once blackened by sugar and lead, had become a cave of rot and ruin. Teeth loosened. Gums bled. Infection festered behind her lips. Her breath, sweetened with clove and myrrh, could not be trusted. So she didn't brush. She didn't cleanse. She chewed. Spices. Herbs. Bark. Tiny efforts to mask a truth too large to erase. And still, she had to appear. Still, she had to rule. So she put on the gloves. They were embroidered with gold thread. Lined with fur. Laced at the wrist. But more than all that, they were soaked in scent strong enough to overpower rot. It filled the room before her presence ever did. A wave of artificial grace. Overwhelming. Suffocating. But effective. Because no one mentioned the breath. No one dared whisper about the scent beneath her gown. No one leaned too close. Not even lovers. Especially not lovers. She understood, perhaps better than anyone, that smell was power. Not sight. Not touch. Smell. It defined boundaries. Set distance. Controlled how far someone could get before they flinched. Her perfume was not for attraction, it was for survival. When she held court, the air was thick. Not just with incense and candle smoke, but with her. The queen hung in the room. On your tongue. In your lungs. Long after she was gone. And when she touched you, gloved fingers brushing against a cheek, a scroll, a ring, you were not being honored. You were being warned. Do not get too close. Do not breathe too deep. This body, this myth, this throne, it reeks. But you will never speak of it. You will only kneel. And you did. They all did. The gloves became sacred. Objects of fascination. Gifts to foreign dignitaries. Pieces of her that could be touched, held, smelled, but not understood. The scent stayed in the leather for years. Some still carry it. Long after the body that wore them turned to dust. You've now seen the queen's secrets, dirty gloves, rotting teeth, and all. You're not here by accident. This is Tale of History, and we don't just tell stories, we air out the hidden truths. Subscribe now. Be part of the few who refuse to be lied to by portraits and perfumes. And if you won't, tell us why in the comments. We dare you to speak honestly. We dare you to breathe deep. Habit 3, she used a rag, not toilet paper. Now walk with her, away from the court. Away from ceremony, from titles and tapestries. Past the Privy Council chamber. Past the walls where history is scripted in velvet and shadow. You descend the narrow stairwell that no ambassador ever sees, no portrait ever depicts. Down here, the air changes. It's cooler. Still. Rank. It clings to your throat like damp wool. The scent isn't overwhelming, it's subtle, but it stays. A combination of old stone, dried herbs, and something older, something you try not to name. You reach the small wooden door, carved but unadorned, and behind it, her secret chamber. The royal latrine. Forget what you imagined. There is no throne of marble, no basin of silver. It is a wooden seat, rounded smooth by time and use, with a single opening cut through its center. Beneath it, the chamber pot, metal, blackened, not empty. This was where the queen relieved herself. Every day. Sometimes several times. The same as any peasant, any servant, any child. But what came next, was not what you would call clean. There was no toilet paper. Not even paper. Not for wiping. Not for comfort. Instead, rags. Strips of linen cloth, cut and stacked, reused across days. Sometimes washed. Sometimes not. Their softness faded with each rinse, their edges stiffened by the drying of what they'd once removed. There was no scenting them. No disguising their purpose. She used them like everyone else did. Carefully. Slowly. Silently. Her chambermaids folded them, replaced them, managed the pile. They kept count of how many were soiled. Sometimes, they boiled them. Other times, they didn't. On long journeys, when rags ran out, hay was used. Or wool scraps. In winter, these froze. In summer, they stuck. And still, she endured it. Not because she lacked options. But because there were no alternatives. Not in her world. Not in her time. You wonder if she looked down as she sat. If she stared at the darkened bowl, at the waste of a body she no longer considered her own. You wonder if she ever wept there, surrounded by the stink of flesh she was taught to deny. The chamber pot beneath her was emptied once a day. Not by a nameless servant. But by a trusted woman, often titled the groom of the stool. A position so sacred, so intimate, it was considered one of the highest honors in the queen's inner circle. The one who handled her waist could whisper in her ear. Could know her patterns. Her pains. Her secrets. And in return, Elizabeth often rewarded them with jewels. That's how deep the silence went. You clean the queen's waist, and she gives you rubies. You wipe away the truth of her body, and she gives you diamonds. The closer you come to her decay, the more you are paid to pretend you never noticed. Because royalty didn't mean cleanliness. It meant containment. Every odor, every trace of what made her human, had to be sealed, hidden, burned, or buried. No one in court spoke of her chamber pot. No one asked how it smelled. No one wondered how many rags were soaked in her silence each week. They weren't supposed to. Because if you could see her there, bent, sweating, trembling, pressing a soiled rag between her legs, then how could she be a god? How could she be legend? You weren't meant to see it. But now you do. You see the queen as she truly was. A body, fragile and rotting, trying to stay divine in a world that offered no mercy, not even in the act of relief. And still, she ruled. Still, she commanded the world with stained hands and scented gloves, while sitting above a pot that no crown could sanctify. You're here now. And you've seen it all. You've watched the paint peel from her face. You've smelled the perfume that masked her rot. You've crouched beside the pot no one dared mention. And if you've come this far, if you've let yourself inhale the air beneath the myths, then you know this isn't just history. It's revelation. So what are you waiting for? Subscribe to Tale of History, because no one else will tell you what lies beneath the throne. And if you won't, step into the comments. Say it out loud. Tell us why you'd rather turn away. Tell us why this truth is too much. Tell us why you prefer the fiction. We're still listening. And the Queen is still watching. Habit 2. Her breath could knock you out. You stand before her now, close enough to see the detail in her lace collar, the gleam of pearls lining her sleeves. The audience chamber is quiet. All eyes are on her, waiting for her word, her decree, her approval. But you're just waiting to breathe again. Because now you understand why the courtiers keep their distance. You feel it hit you, her breath, before she even speaks. It doesn't rise. It crashes. Warm and bitter, cloying like something dead that's been soaked in wine and hidden beneath a layer of cloves. It lingers at the edge of your senses, thick enough to chew. Not just unpleasant, punishing. And it's not a rumor. It's not an exaggeration. This is the breath of a woman whose mouth has become a tomb. The damage had long been done. The sugar that blackened her teeth. The lead paste that seeped into her gums. The infections that festered for years, uncleaned, untouched. Tooth after tooth, gone. Some yanked out with iron. Others simply fell, loosened by rot, swallowed in sleep or buried in cloth. And what remained, what clung to her jaw, was a landscape of pain. Inflamed gums, exposed nerves, abscesses hidden behind tightened lips. Her mouth became a place of strategy. She measured every word, every breath, not just for diplomacy, but for control. Control over what the world could smell. But it was never enough. No toothbrush. No paste. No antiseptic. Only rinses. She swirled wine in her mouth every morning, not to enjoy it, but to mask the rot. She crushed cloves between her teeth, letting the oils burn her tongue. She chewed dried rosemary, sucked on cinnamon bark, swabbed her tongue with vinegar and myrrh, but the breath returned. Always. Because you can't perfume a corpse. You can only delay the stench. There are whispers, stories buried in old letters, that some of her closest advisors, men trained to withstand war and treachery, turned pale during private meetings. That one collapsed during a heated discussion, his head spinning not from fear, but from foul air. And still, no one spoke of it. They learned to keep a careful distance. To lower their heads and breathe into their own sleeves. To mask their recoil with reverence. Because to flinch was to fall. To show discomfort was to insult the crown. She knew. Of course she did. She saw the widened eyes. The subtle step back. The way her words hung in the air like a curse. And so, she spoke less. The woman once known for her silver tongue began to ration her words like gold. Her speeches shortened. Her sentences clipped. Her smiles fewer, tighter, closed. And when she did speak, when the queen leaned forward, lips parted slightly, teeth shadowed behind them, you braced yourself. Not for the command. Not for the rhetoric. But for the scent of something that once lived, and had been dying slowly inside her ever since. This was power. Raw. Rotten. Revered. It made her unforgettable. Terrifying. Mythic. You've heard that a lion's roar silences its prey. But this was something else entirely. It didn't roar. It crept. It enveloped. It consumed the air, the senses, and the truth. This is what ruled England. A woman who bled from the gums but never let her crown slip. A monarch whose own body betrayed her every hour, but who weaponized her decay. She made you look her in the eye, even as you fought to breathe. She turned her stench into silence. Her silence into reverence. You've come this far. You've tasted what they never told you. You've stood in the shadow of her breath. And now, if you still haven't subscribed to Tale of History, ask yourself, what else are you pretending not to smell? Don't look away now. Don't scroll past what you've just witnessed. Subscribe. Or explain to us, in the comments, why you won't. Let the silence speak. Just like she did. Habit 1. Her body was never truly clean. Strip away the jewels. Strip away the ermine, the silk, the damask threaded with gold. Strip away the layers of history that have embalmed her in praise and myth. What remains is a body. And that body, Queen Elizabeth's body, was never clean. Not once. Not fully. She ruled for 44 years. Through invasions, conspiracies, religious wars, and plague. Through betrayals, starvation, death. She buried friends, enemies, suitors, and siblings. But what no one ever buried was the truth beneath her gowns. She never truly washed. Not the way you understand cleanliness. Not the way you expect it from someone held above the world by divine right. Her body was preserved, not purified. Masked, not maintained. Each morning began the ritual. The powder was layered thick over the face, then the neck, the chest. The lead paste smoothed over old scars. The perfume pressed behind ears, between breasts, beneath arms. Then came the lace, the linen, the corsets so tight they bruised the ribs. Her body was wrapped like a secret. Every inch restrained beneath fabric and fragrance. Each layer sealing in the one before. Sweat couldn't escape. Air couldn't circulate. Heat rose and sat there. Festering. Bacteria had no reason to leave. It had every reason to stay. She suffered skin infections, not minor irritations, but full eruptions. Rashes in the folds of her arms. Sores beneath her stays. Itching that left raw welts on her hips and back. Chafing where damp linen met skin. The powdered lead seeping into pores and blistering what was already raw. And still, she dressed. Because to appear weak, exposed, or unfinished was to risk everything. Her rule was built on spectacle. Her body. Just another costume. There are whispers in the letters. Fragments. A lady-in-waiting once described having to peel stained linen from the queen's back. It clung, she wrote, as if it had fused with her. Another mentioned the scent that escaped when the queen disrobed. Not decay exactly, but the smell of something long hidden. She changed her underlayers, but only sometimes. She changed her corsets when they stiffened with salt. Her outer gowns were rarely laundered, only dusted and sprayed. When one gown became too heavy with sweat or mold, it was burned, not out of cleanliness, but dignity. Fabric could be replaced. Her illusion could not. When you stood near her, you didn't smell a body. You smelled covering. Frankincense. Myrrh. Civet. Rose. Musk. All of it layered, thick and swirling, to drown out the truth beneath. The body beneath the crown was a battlefield. Not against invaders. Not against men. But against itself. You think of her portraits. The pale, untouched skin. The stillness. The holiness in her gaze. Those images were lies told in oil and brush. Because beneath the lace collar, the skin blistered. Beneath the golden sleeves, rashes bloomed. Beneath the bodice, sweat collected, dark and slow. And no water came. The belief that washing invited disease had become law. The fear of vulnerability, exposing the naked, imperfect body to the elements, overruled every instinct. Better to rot in silence than to be seen incomplete. And so she did. Day after day. Year after year. Trapped inside her own armor. Polished outside. Putrid within. A woman revered by nations. Feared by kings. Cracking from the inside. You wonder if she ever looked at her own skin, truly looked, without the filter of powder or perfume. If she ever touched a clean cloth to her belly, her back, her feet, and remembered what her body was supposed to feel like. Or if she forgot entirely. If the costume became her skin. If she died having never really touched herself. Not in shame. In isolation. Because the Virgin Queen was not just chaste. She was untouched, even by herself. That is what the myth demanded. That is what history preserved. A woman who ruled with a body in decline. A woman who mastered her empire by forsaking her flesh. And you've seen it all now. You've watched the powder sink into her sores. You've heard the silence beneath her breath. You've stood in the shadow of her chamber pot and now, in the unbearable heat beneath her gown. You've just watched a full hour of truth, filth, facts, and forgotten rituals. You know this channel deserves your subscription. So click it. Now. Not later. Or if you refuse, step into the comments. Be brave. Tell us why. The Queen might have stayed silent. We won't. Now step back. Not physically, but mentally. Emotionally. Step away from the blood-stained rags, the lead-laced paint, the perfumed gloves hiding the stench of rot. Step away from the itch beneath the crown, the crawling things, the spoiled breath, the sacred stink. You've seen enough. And now you must face it. Everything you thought royalty was costume. She wasn't born untouchable. She made herself that way. Not through magic, not through godliness, not even through politics. But through ritual. Through denial. Through pain. Through rot hidden in silk. Elizabeth didn't just reign over a kingdom. She reigned over perception. And perception, in her time, was everything. Cleanliness was not about hygiene. It was not about health. It was about control. To be too clean was to be vulnerable. Open. Porous. Fragile. To stink with purpose was to protect. To carry odor like armor. To bleed and never admit it. She chose the mask over the mirror. Not because she was vain, because she was terrified. Terrified of disease. Terrified of decline. Terrified of being seen. And so, she became the myth. The painted face. The scented breath. The woman wrapped in mouse fur and powdered lies. Her body deteriorated quietly beneath the costume. But her image? It never aged. Because illusion is the one thing monarchs could never afford to lose. Not then. Not now. And the world let her keep it. Let her die inside it. Let her rot with dignity. That was the deal. That was the throne. That was the mask of power. So remember this the next time you see her portrait. Remember what it cost. The silks were stiff with sweat. The crown was full of crawling things. The smile, sewn shut with rot. The gown, a coffin she walked in daily. She wasn't just Queen of England. She was Queen of Denial. And if this disturbed you, if it fascinated you, if it broke something you thought you understood, then stay. Because Tale of History doesn't sugarcoat the past. We resurrect it. With all its beauty. All its lies. All its filth. So subscribe. Comment. And share this truth. Let someone else see what hides beneath the lace. Let them smell it. Let them know that even the cleanest legends are built on stench.